Hi there everyone, and welcome to this video about narrative structure. It's been a while since I've done a video on structure actually, but I've had a few requests through to do the structure question for the Hartop paper. So this is it. I've decided to do it finally. This will conclude a series of videos that I've done using the Hartop paper. I've already done the language task, and I've also done paper 1 question 4 using the Hartop paper as well. So they will be obviously in my videos that I've done over the last few months. So this is the last question that I will be doing using the Hartop paper. I'm going to start with this video in terms of just introducing to you what structure means. Again, I have done a video a couple of months ago now introducing you to structure as a concept, so please do go back and have a look at that introduction to structure video. So I'm going to start with just introducing you to the task, what structure means. Then we will look at the Hartop extract, and then we will finish this video by looking at 3 exemplar answers from the exam board, actually, that the exam board have created, and which the exam board has also marked. So it's kind of official, which is very useful to look at. So I'm going to start then by just introducing you briefly, that is, to the concept of structure, narrative structure. We don't usually think of structure being something to do with writing. We often think of structure to do with components being put together. So usually what we will do is we'll think of architecture. So, we'll think about buildings or structures being put together with materials being used in a certain way to create a strong structure, as in a building or a monument, for example. So we've got the Eiffel Tower there at the bottom. We can also think about the structure of DNA, and again, DNA is full of different components which all fit together and will work together to create DNA. And the final example is a jigsaw puzzle. We can think of the structure of a jigsaw puzzle, all those different bits that need to fit together to create the overall structure of the puzzle, which will then present us with the image that we are trying to make. So it's the same thing with narrative structure for question 3. The idea being, how do sentences fit together to form paragraphs, and how do those paragraphs fit together in order to construct the text that we actually end up reading on the page. So structure is all to do with sequence, it's all to do with order, it's all to do with how the writer has fitted the paragraphs together, and those paragraphs are also made up of sentences as well. Okay, so you have to ask yourself with this, why has the writer started the text with this? Why have they then finished the text with this? So it's all about how these components all fit together. Something else that I've also used in previous PowerPoints for structure are these devices, really, or these bits of terminology that we can use to show the examiner that we are analysing structure. Different set of terms than what we would have with language, but again, if you can use any of these phrases or any of these devices in your response, then you're going to get marks for that. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these right now, but with structure, we often talk about focus. We often talk about shifting focus as if this was a camera filming something in a particular order. We talk about zooming into things because those things are important, which is why the writer is describing them in a lot of detail. We can talk about beginning, middle, end, or exposition, climax, resolution, which is essentially the same. We can talk about a cyclical structure, finishing the extract with what we started with, so that writer kind of takes on a bit of a journey, a bit of a 360. And we can also more complex, I suppose, talk about equilibrium in terms of, at the end, does everything settle down? Is a sense of peace restored? Does everything go back to normal or not? Or, for example, is there a cliffhanger which actually disrupts that equilibrium and things don't go back to normal, to a sense of calm? So that's, I suppose, can also be to do with the ending. So by all means, I would suggest write these down, because this is really quite a comprehensive list of all the things that you could talk about for structure. Okay, you won't have an extract which includes all of them, but you will have some of these in every single extract that you get for paper one, because you have to. That's what texts are. They will use these things. So if you can pick up on any of these things and use any of these phrases, that would be very useful indeed. Before I show you the question itself, because we know the question will always be the same for structure, no matter what the extract is, I just want you to remind you then that with structure of texts, we're talking about the sequence or order of events, which means how are they put together and why, importantly. We still need to quote from the extract, and this is the only question for paper one which will require us to read the whole extract. So please make sure that you've read the whole thing before you even attempt to write a response for this. 8 marks, 10 minutes. There are bullet points under the question, which I'll show you in a second, and those bullet points can help structure your response. So what I tell my students is to write 2 paragraphs, 1 paragraph about the first bullet point and the second paragraph about the second. In order to put the task in quite simple terms, you're really telling the examiner, why has the writer told you the story in this order, in this sequence, and what effect does it have on you, or what do you think the intended effects were from the writer's perspective? Sometimes the word interest can make some students a bit spooked by this task, because they think interest means, oh my god, it's so interesting, my jaw is on the floor, I'm so intrigued by this. But interest is actually a subjective term, which means that it can include a variety of emotional responses from you in terms of the text. So it can include horror, shock, mystery. It isn't just interest. It could be humour as well, sympathy, sadness, disgust. Okay, so any response that you have emotively to the text will come under that heading of interest. It isn't just about interest as in being completely captivated by it. It's a variety of terms. We do know that we need to look at the whole of the source, and we do know that the task will always be the same in the middle there. But here are the bullet points, and I will always say to students to cross off that third bullet point. It's quite broad, and some students struggle to actually use that third bullet point. What I will then say to students is you've got 2 bullet points to work with. The first is the beginning, so your first paragraph about structure will be about the opening of the extract, and the second paragraph that you write will be about the middle and the end. And by doing it in that order, writing the response in that order, it means you're naturally picking up on a flow of events in the extract, because between each paragraph you can say the phrase shifts focus. So for structure, it's all about flowcharts really, which is why I keep using that flowchart diagram on the right there. What is the journey that the writer has taken us on as we read on? So as the source develops, as we read on, what is happening, and why has the writer told us the events in that particular order? Okay, so that is the task, the question. That question is always worded exactly the same, no matter what the extract is. Okay, so let's now look at the extract itself. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the extract into 3 sections, beginning, middle and end. And doing so will help you structure a response, because really what we're looking at is the sequence of events. So what are we told in the beginning, what are we told in the middle, and what are we told at the end? Please also pay attention to the annotations that I've written at the right of the screen with the brackets there. It's often a good technique sometimes to write a little summary of what's happening in each paragraph, and then use those little annotations in your response, because it will give you the general flow or direction of the narrative that we're being told. So I'm going to read through this, and please also pay attention to the bits I've highlighted in green, because those bits that I've highlighted could be pieces of evidence that you include in a response. Don't have to be, but I would want to perhaps use the bits that I've highlighted. So we're told to begin with that we have this Ford motor van, which is old and repainted green, and it's being driven by somebody called Hartop, who's a greengrocer. And we're told that it had scratched in streaky white lettering on a flattened out biscuit tin nail to the side, was slowly travelling across a high treeless stretch of country in squally November half darkness. Rain hailed on the windscreen and periodically swished like a sea wave on the sheaves of pink chrysanthemums strung on the van roof. Hartop was driving, a thin, angular man, starved face. He seemed to occupy almost all the seat, sprawling awkwardly, so that his wife and their daughter Alice sat squeezed up, the girl with her arms flat as though ironed against her side, her thin legs pressed tight together into the size of one. The Hartops' faces seemed moulded in clay, and the light from the van lamps were a flat swede colour. Like the man, the two women were thin, with a screwed-up thinness that made them look both hard and frightened. Hartop drove with great caution, grasping the wheel tightly, braking hard at the bends, his big yellowish eyes fixed ahead, protuberantly with vigilance. His hands, visible in the faint dashboard light, were marked on the backs with dark smears of dried rabbit's blood. The van fussed and rattled, the chrysanthemums always swishing, rain-soaked, in the sudden high wind squalls, and the two women sat in a state of silent apprehension, their bodies not moving except to lurch with the van, their clayish faces continuously intent, almost scared. In the lamp gloom, and after some time Hartop gave a slight start and then drew the van to the roadside and stopped it. So we're going to pause there then. So this is the beginning of the extract, let's say. You can see I've got two brackets here. So the first two paragraphs we could say is the beginning, it's the exposition. It introduces us to the characters, Hartop, his wife, and Alice, the daughter, which tells us how the writer wants us to see these characters. We're supposed to see Hartop as a very strict father figure, and we're supposed to see the two women, I think, as kind of in his shadow a little bit, and maybe a little bit intimidated by him. We're also told that they're in this quite crappy van. It's quite an old van because they don't have enough money to buy a new one, which suggests that they are living quite a modest lifestyle. They don't have a lot of money, which may create sympathy. As we move into that last bracket there, we're told about the weather, so we have some pathetic fallacy here. The weather could be very hazardous. And at the end there, a sense of mystery. Why is he stopping the van for? What is going on? So in the beginning, we could join all of that together to talk about how the writer opens the extract to interest us as readers. Okay. We then move into the middle of the extract. Hear anything drop, he said. I thought I heard something. It's the wind, the woman said. I can hear it all the time. No, something dropped. They sat listening, but the engine still ticked, and they could hear nothing beyond it, but the wind and rain squalling in the dead grass along the roadside. Alice, you get out, Hartop said. The girl began to move herself almost before he had spoken. Get out and see if you can see anything. Alice stepped across her mother's legs, groped with blind instinct for the step, and then got out. It was raining furiously. The darkness seemed solid with rain. See anything? Hartop said. No. Hartop leaned across his wife and shouted, Go back a bit and see what it was. The woman moved to protest, but Hartop was already speaking again. Something dropped. We'll stop at Drake's turn. You'll catch up. I know something dropped. He let in the clutch as he was speaking, and the van began to move away. So this is the middle of the extract, and we move from general description to dialogue. So that is also something that you can talk about for structure, what we might call the transition between two things. So here we have a transition between description and dialogue. And the dialogue is quite important because it helps us understand the characters. We already get the gist from the beginning that Hartop is quite strict. And the way he talks here with quite imperative sentences and no pleases or thank yous, again suggests that he is to be obeyed. He has the power here. We might want to use the term adjacency pairs, which is a more complex term to describe turn taking in conversation. So when people interact with each other, we can say that we have adjacency pairs. We also have a sense of mystery because, again, we still don't know what fell off the roof. We still don't know why Hartop has stopped, and we still don't know what Alice is going to find. It might be something sinister, but it also might be something quite innocent. Again, we talked about before how in structure you can talk about repeated motifs. And again, it's no surprise that the writer continues to refer to the weather. It's constantly mentioned here, and the darkness as well. So again, the repeated reference to the weather could also foreground the sense of tension and also the sense of almost broken down relationships between these family members as well. And again, the dialogue tells us that it is Hartop that has the power. And he leaves Alice in the road by herself, which you might think is quite cruel. Not only is she a child, and who knows who is outside, but it's also terribly bad weather. So that's not a particularly nice thing to do. So again, it shows that Hartop not only has the power, but he's also maybe quite a cruel man, maybe quite sinister himself. And then we move to the end of the extract, and it's quite a long ending actually. I've chosen to split it this way. And the extract finishes by saying, soon, to Alice, it seemed to be moving very rapidly. In the rain and the darkness, all she could see was the tail light smoothly receding. She watched it for a moment and then began to walk back along the road. The wind was behind her, but repeatedly it seemed to veer and smash her, with the rain full in the face. She walked without hurrying. She seemed to accept the journey as she accepted the rain and her father's words, quite stoically. She walked in the middle of the road, looking directly ahead, as though she had a long journey before her. She could see nothing. And then, after a time, she stumbled against something in the road. She stooped and picked up a bunch of pink chrysanthemums, and then she began to walk back with them along the road. Before very long she could see the red tail light of the van again. It was stationary. She could also see the lights of houses, little squares of yellow, which the recurrent rain on her lashes transformed into sudden stars. When she reached the van, Mrs. Hartop said, "What was it?" "Only a bunch of chrysanthemums." Hartop himself appeared at the very moment she was speaking. "Only," he said. "Only? What do you mean by only, eh?" Alice stood mute. Then Hartop raised his voice. "Well, don't stand there. Do something. Go on. Go on. Go and see who wants a bunch of chrysanthemums. Move yourself." Alice obeyed at once. She picked up the flowers, walked away, and vanished, all without a word. And that is how the extract finishes. That is the end of the extract. So again, we've got the weather foregrounded at the top there. As we've said, foregrounds perhaps Hartop's cruelty and his bullying force in this extract. We then have a change in time because we go slightly ahead of time and we find out that it wasn't anything sinister that fell off the roof, it was just some flowers. And obviously that releases the tension because the mystery is solved as to what was missing. It was some flowers there. And we know that because the Hartop is a greengrocer, it's important that these flowers are his money, so he can't afford to lose any produce. He needs to sell it to make money for the family. So as I said for the language question and also for the paper 1 question 4 task, it might not be that Hartop is being deliberately sinister. He's just concerned about making money for his family. And then as we end the extract, we return back to dialogue. So we again transition from description to dialogue, back into some adjacency pairs and some interactions, which again reinforce Hartop's domineering character. And it may also create sympathy for Alice. She almost has got used to this kind of treatment. She just accepts and obeys her father, does as she's told, maybe because she's very worn down with his behaviour, or she's too frightened to do otherwise, or maybe she's not really bothered and she's just doing it for an easy life perhaps. So that is the extract, and that is what happens. That is the sequence of events. It's actually quite simple. Family driving in a van in a storm, flowers fall off the roof, Alice told to get out to find them, she does, comes back, and Hartop basically says go and sell them. So it's quite a simple narrative. But we've now got to think about, okay, well, how can we put this all together in a response? So before we look at the 3 examples of the response to this particular task using the Hartop paper, let's talk about storyboarding, and let's talk about how our reading of the extract just then, we're able to split the extract into 3 sections. And as you can see, whenever we have an arrow, When we move from different sections, we are shifting focus. So it's always a good idea to use that term in red there in your response whenever you transition from beginning, middle, and end. So again, what I might do in class is I might get my students to draw the events of the extract in order. So they might begin by drawing a van in a storm. And underneath, I would ask them, okay, so why is that significant? So at the beginning, we're introduced to characters and van. So it introduces person, place, and time. The writer zooms into describing the three characters so we can interpret their relationships and personalities. So it's almost contextualizing the characters for us. If we don't know about the characters, we're not going to care about them. So in order to maintain an emotive bond between extract and audience, we need to actually care about who we're reading about. And that's what we can do as humans. We can empathise and we can sympathise. So same with films. The film is going to be successful if the characters are believable, if we feel like we know them. You can say the writer zooms in to describe their facial features and the fact that they earn quite a modest living. As we said, the van is a bit dented and a bit worse for wear. We have an external to internal shift because we go from outside of the van to inside the van. We have the pathetic fallacy of the storm, which reinforces the fractured relationships between the characters. And we also have a sense of mystery created because we want to know why he's stopping the van and ultimately what fell off the roof. As we then move into the middle of the extract, the image changes. We then get an image of a girl in the rain because Alice gets out to look for what fell off the roof, and her dad's instructions to her suggest that he isn't that caring. Again, we have an internal to external shift this time because we go from inside the van where they're all sat to outside where Alice is walking in the rain in the road to see what fell off the roof. So we have another shift there from internal to external this time. Sympathy is created because Hartop tells her to get out into the rain, and he drives off and leaves her there. So that's not particularly caring. We might have a sense of unease because we want to know what is outside. Is it really safer to be on her own? What fell off the roof? And we also understand in more detail the power dynamics as well. We again infer that Hartop has the power and his wife and Alice are the ones who maybe are quite intimidated by him. So that's how we shift from the beginning to the middle. And then we have the final shift from middle to end. So the writer shifts focus to Alice finding the flowers and Hartop's less than pleased response when he tells her to basically don't just stand there, go and do something useful. So at the end, why has the writer structured the text with that ending? It could be that because it releases the tension, we know it was just a bunch of flowers. But from Hartop's perspective, those flowers mean money, and money means food on the table. So he's got to sell those flowers to make money and support his family. The writer focuses on the anger, coldness, and cruelty maybe of Hartop. Again, we understand the fractured relationships from that dialogue and those adjacency pairs. So the resolution of this extract, there is this kind of sense of equilibrium here, that things go back to how they used to be after the mystery of what fell off the roof has been solved. So if we're going to storyboard this extract, that is what we might end up drawing, and that is the sequence of events, and that is the structure of the extract. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how we can develop I can't even speak. I'm going to start again. Let's talk about how we can develop our ideas regarding this structure response. Now, these bullet points appeared for the language response, but we can still use some of these to help develop our ideas for the structure response as well, in terms of the effects that the structure creates. So we know, for example, that focusing on their appearances at the beginning, by telling us they have, he has a starred face and the fact that he's thin, suggests that he is malnourished and the family doesn't have a lot of money in order to eat very well, perhaps, and perhaps lacks compassion and generosity. The same thing in terms of how he is sat on the seat in the van. We can also talk about the recurring motif of the thinness and the thin of his appearance, and also how the weather is consistently referred to as well. We can also say that Alice is voiceless, and also so is her mother, in comparison to Hartop's dominance and authority. You might say that the women are oppressed and suppressed in this situation, and Hartop is the one that does all the speaking and all the shouting when necessary. You can talk about the fact that they just tend to accept, particularly Alice at the end there, just tends to accept his behaviour as if it's just normal. But this last bullet point is also interesting because this event, these flowers falling off the roof, is created by the writer to give us an insight into the characters. So the writer is sat at his desk and he's saying to himself, well, what can I do in order to tell my readers what these characters are like? And he says, I know, I'm going to get the flowers to fall off the roof and get Hartop to boss Alice into going and getting them. So this event with the flowers is a good use of how the writer is using these events to give us an insight into these characters and also their relationships. So we can use some of those ideas there in those bullet points to help enhance the reasons why perhaps the writer structured the text in the order and the sequence that he has. So let's get down to business in terms of the mark scheme. So no surprise, we've got 4 levels. That's the same across all of the questions really in the mark scheme. We've got level 1 there and proceeds up to level 4. In order to get grade 4, which is approximately half marks, you need to be really in level 2 at least. So I'm going to be showing you a level 2 response, a level 3 response, and a level 4 response. And you can see the bullet points stay the same throughout the whole of the levels. You've got to be able to talk about the effects of structural choices. We've got to quote, and you've also got to use terminology. And we have covered all of that in today's video so far. So it's now coming to the point which always happens really in a lot of my videos, is where we go through it and we start to put it all together into some kind of response. So I'm going to first show you student A, and student A got 3 out of 8. Again, this is not my work. This is work that the exam board has provided for teachers to use to show students and also to help with their marking and to be accurate with their marking. And AQA, the exam board, gave this response 3 out of 8. So we're talking here the bottom of level 2, so just below half marks. So the student says, at the beginning, the writer focuses on the Ford motor van travelling across a treeless stretch of country in squally November half darkness. It paints a picture of a rusty old van driving through an open long stretch of road with the weather being so bad, rain hailed on the windscreen. You can almost imagine the windscreen wipers going crazy. The focus then changes when Hartop thinks he heard something. He then makes his daughter Alice get out and see if you can see anything. Once Alice is out in the rain and darkness, Hartop then drives off and suggests she catches them up later. The story ends with Alice catching up with her parents, only to be greeted with a raised voice from Hartop and making her go and see chrysanthemums. It shows how uncaring he is as a father and makes you realise that he is using her to earn the money. Okay, so again, despite that typo at the end, not from me, but from the student. I'm just copying what the student wrote in the materials. You can see that this gets 3 out of 8. They have used lots of terminology like focus, changing, ending. I think they've also used beginning there as well. So they have talked about that. They've also quoted, but they haven't really talked about effects very detailed. So it's the effects bullet point that has really let them down with this one. 3 out of 8 though, not bad. But again, you could do with just pushing it up a little bit more, even if it's just by 1 mark to get 4 in order to be after the grade 4. So that's what you would be aiming for if you were going to get a mark, a 3 out of 8 there. Student B was given 4 out of 8. So this is now half mark. So if you can get to this standard, then you would be in a better place than student A. The writer begins, again, I'm just copying from the exemplar material, so apologies if I do read typos wrong. But the writer begins the source describing the van in which the family works in. This makes the reader intrigued by what the family do. From line 1 to 21, the writer is describing the scene they are in. The writer emphasises the weather in this to make the reader believe the weather will have an effect on the van or the family. The writer uses so much time to describe the family and their work to emphasise how cruel the upcoming events are. Also, all three of the beginning paragraphs give some description to Hartop. After the beginning 3 paragraphs, the writer dramatically changes from description to speech. This is to interest the reader. I thought that it would just be describing throughout. The writer includes speech about dropping something. This is to show how poor they are. They must go back to retrieve it. Then it focuses on the daughter, Alice, having to walk alone in the treacherous weather to find them. This intrigues the reader because it makes you believe that possibly the father would drive away, so she is abandoned. So by adding that the daughter had to go out and the description of her at the start, it makes the reader believe that the father hates her and would do anything to leave. Then it shifts to speech again to increase how important these chrysanthemums are. Hartop raises his voice again and demands that Alice gives them to the houses in the street, that might say. I don't know. This again makes the reader interested about whether the dad wants the daughter. So again, half marks. It's a little bit more developed than student A, but again, there isn't a lot of comment about why there. And this also uses less terminology, really, I think, than the first one. So it's only 1 mark better, but obviously every mark counts in any kind of exam. So to write at that standard would be what you would be needing to write at in order to get half marks. Okay. Again, the typos there are from AQA because AQA were looking at handwriting and were typing them to stop teachers being biased about marking work, giving work that was spelt wrong lower marks, basically. So they typed it up, but they kept all of the spelling errors. Finally, student C, this got 7 out of 8. So I've given you 2 level 2s and a level 4. Okay. So again, this is obviously very strong work. You can tell by how much has been written here in 10 minutes, but also as I read it, you'll hear the terms, you'll hear the effects. So this is pretty good, this one. At the start, the writer begins with an exposition, setting the scene for the reader and having the narrative focus on the characters. The detailed description of their poor appearances and living conditions helps us build sympathy as a reader, as we feel sorry for the thin people we are introduced to. Furthermore, there is also a strong focus on the appearance of the van as being old and the use of a biscuit tin for advertisement. The description further helps us to understand that the Hartops are not wealthy, and so we feel sympathy for them. In the middle of the narrative, the focus shifts to the action of the van driving it and the mysterious object that has fallen. The action is rising here because as readers we become interested to know what the object is. Our interest and tension is further increased by the use of the dialogue to represent confusion of the characters as to what, if anything, has dropped. As the characters are concerned with and confused by what had dropped, as readers we are made to feel that some way through the use of dialogue and short sentences to quicken pace and represent fear. The use of pathetic fallacy creates a foreboding tone in the middle of the extract. As Alice steps out, we get intense descriptions of the storm, and as storms are often linked to nightmarish scenes and unpleasant events, as a reader we feel fearful for Alice, and the tension of the story further increases. Therefore, when it's only a bunch of flowers, we feel relieved and glad that Alice is safe. Finally, the narrative focus shifts once more to the flowers and the interaction between Alice and her father. The relief we feel from discovering that it was only flowers is replaced by shock and fear for Alice once again through the use of anger by her father. The repeated use of short sentences and rhetorical questions help represent his anger at Alice for saying it was only flowers, and so as a reader we feel shocked as it was such a sudden outburst of anger, and it could possibly foreshadow further arguments between the two later in the novel as tensions rise between them. Therefore, we are interested in discovering if Alice is safe in the rest of the story. So you can hear lots of terminology there, exposition, we have got shifting, we have got lots of things to do with middle, end. There's a real sense in this response that they have talked about this kind of direction and flow of the narrative. There's also quotes, but they haven't overdone the quotes. They're there, they're useful. But there's also an impressive reference here to effects and readers. This candidate continually references readers, and that's something else that you can do as well. Keep mentioning the reader, because that will demonstrate to the examiner that you are talking about effects and the effects on readers. Okay, so that is level 4, low level 4 there. So, in summary then, in order to do well with this task, and obviously you all have your own predicted grades, so you know what you should want to achieve that, I would suggest that student B or student C is where your standard needs to be in order to do well with this structure question. However, remember, it is only 10 minutes and it is only 10 marks. So if you feel that you never quite grasp in structure, it's something that you're never quite getting, you can still do well without really doing well on this question. Although we can't be too complacent, it's important to have a go, obviously, with every question and not leave anything out. Because if you leave stuff out, that's a surefire way to not get the qualification. So have a go at every question, even if you feel what you're writing isn't particularly perfect. You might surprise yourself. Okay, so that is the narrative structure question for the Hartop paper. Please let me know if there are any other videos that you would like me to record, and thank you very much for watching.